Hello once again, YouTube. I am back, and this time it's for something different. It's not the Leafs, although I thought this fan, or sorry, this fan who would be me one day with no skin, still waiting for a cup. For the current climate of the Leafs universe, this would be a good shirt to wear today. Anyways, a bunch of stuff that I've got done recently. My son's show just closed this past weekend, so all of the craziness of building props, making costumes, yada yada, being at rehearsals, being backstage, going to the show, all the stuff that comes with his show is gone and past. So we've come into a time of, well, Christmas will be coming up soon, but a time of much less stuff going on in our lives. So I've been able to get some stuff done and thinking about it now. So the first thing, we were out at this weird store. It was like slash a dollar store slash general store slash unique finds kind of store. And I found this, the DVD of Red Water. I watched the bejesus out of this movie back when it came out in, I think, 2003 or so. It was a made-for-TV movie. And you know, back in the day when TBS would show a movie, they'd show it like over the course of a weekend 18 times. And I watched it probably like 3 times in a row. It takes place in the Louisiana's bayou. There's a guy named John Sanders, played by Lou Diamond Phillips, who is a fisherman, and he and his buddy Emery go out on John's boat every day, go to fish, but the economy's bad, yada yada. The bank is going to foreclose on his boat, so he's in some dire straits. Suddenly, one day, his ex-wife Kelly shows up, asking for his help. She now works for an oil company, and they have recently discovered a big pocket of oil in the swamp. So, but they've encountered some problems with their drilling, and John is actually a former digger for a drilling company, and he was really good, but he quit the business when he lost a couple of his men during a blowout or whatever they call them. So he left that life behind him, but given his current circumstances, he eventually agrees to help Kelly and her boss by going out to the rig and offering his assistance and that sort of thing. There's 2 things that are going to complicate this situation, though. First, a trio of thugs who are after $3 million that were dumped in the swamp on some botched deal are in the same region diving and looking for this treasure. And they're very close to killing each other, let alone any strangers that are going to get in the way of them finding their booty. So there's that. The other thing is that during the drilling this oil company is doing, it kind of rumbled the swamp floor and opened up this cavern, and through it came a freshwater bull shark or whatever, or a bull shark that can live in, I don't know what it is. I don't know if there is such a thing as a freshwater shark, but a shark comes through and it starts eating people. So they've got those 2 things working against them, and so all 3 of these parties, shark, thugs, good people, come together around this oil rig in this cataclysmic finale, and that's so there you have it. So it's like a B action movie, you know, like that would be on Sci-Fi Channel or something, right? But that's kind of one of my breads and butters, right? So I was all over that movie, and it was every bit as good all these years later as it was the first time I watched it. So that was that. That's the only thing I really watched or finished watching recently. The next thing is a book called Last Shot of the Star Wars Galaxy. It takes place like maybe a few years after Return of the Jedi in Disney's current storyline, not the old Legends, which I like better, but are now apparently not valid. Han and Leia are, like, Leia's getting the fledgling New Republic up and running. Her and Han have a 2-year-old son named Ben, who we all know what happens to him. But one night, Lando comes knocking on their door and gives Han a knuckle sandwich, and they sit down and talk it out afterwards and realize that their past has come back to haunt them. Lando has been being chased and being trying to be killed by these crazy droids, and they talk it over and they realize what's wrong. And it all, so as the story unfolds and they mount a mission to save Lando and whatever, flashbacks from the past kind of explain what came to be. So basically 15 years ago, a native of Utapau, which is great. I love Utapau in episode 3 of the Star Wars movie, but it hasn't featured in anything since. So, but I thought it was a really cool planet with some really weird natives. So a native of Utapau is going to medical school there to become a surgeon. One day him and his friend are kidnapped from class by these terrorists. And as they're escaping, they get chased by other terrorists, shot down, and out of the wreckage, only Faison Gore, this soon-to-be surgeon, escapes unscathed. His friend is dying, and all he has, he's deserted in the Utapau wastes. He's got himself, his dying friend, and a medical droid. So he goes to work trying to save his friend. And as he goes along, he kind of realizes that biological bodies are just, you're dying since the day you're born. There's nothing to stop the decay of a biological form, whereas droids, if properly maintained, could last forever. So he starts experimenting with splicing droids and humans or other species together, and gets a little sick and twisted in the head. And along the way, he develops this scheme eventually to create this device called the Phalanx, which will eventually, when this plan is ready to be unfurled, turn all droids evil and destroy all biological life around them. So basically, the droids are going to take over the galaxy and cause the extinction of life everywhere. So 15 years ago, after this first started, L3, Lando's eccentric droid, gets wind of this plan and basically drags Lando out into the middle of space where this Phalanx is being hidden, and they try to take it. They don't escape with it, but they cause a delay and some complications to Faison Gore's plan. 5 years later, Han, who has since acquired the Millennium Falcon from Lando, his smuggling friend Sana, who is also he's trying to get with, comes up with the same plan as L3 to acquire this Phalanx and sell it off to the highest bidder. And this time they actually managed to acquire it, if only briefly, before it's jettisoned out into the world again. And that's kind of where that storyline ends. And then all these years later, it finally catches up with them again. Faison Gore is finally ready to activate the Phalanx and turn droids against all biological life. So it's up to Han, Lando, Chewie, Lando's Twi'lek love interest, Kasha, an expert Ewok splicer named Pikpa, an Ugnaught that works for Lando named Florx, as well as a hotshot pilot named Taka, to go out and find Faison Gore, who's really wily and hard to catch, and bring him to justice and stop this dastardly plan from unfolding. And so it's typical Star Wars fare, and that basically sums up the storyline there. The other thing, which I just finished, I actually borrowed this from James's classroom on Meet the Teacher Night. It's called A Great Game. And it's written by our former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, which I saw Stephen Harper on the thing, but I thought it was just coincidence, but it actually was Stephen Harper. It goes over the roots of the professional hockey game that started so many years ago in Canada. It starts in the late 1800s, but mostly focuses on like the first decade and a half of the 1900s, when the roots of the game were really established. It's so weird. The game's origins arguably were kind of in the Montreal region, although other places apparently have claim to the first organized game of hockey, whatever. They went and mentioned Kingston, Halifax, some other places. But Montreal's kind of where it all kind of coalesced, I guess. And then as the game grew in popularity across the country, everybody wanted a piece of hockey, and no more so than in Ontario's capital of Toronto. The only problem was Toronto's winters were not great. They were very unreliable, so there's not a very long hockey season to be had in Toronto back then. Not when you don't have artificial ice, when you're depending solely on the weather to keep the ice frozen. So it was very not quite viable, and so that prevented hockey from really starting up in Toronto in any significant way. And then the other thing that was going on, which I find most intriguing, is that this guy named John Ross Robertson, who owned the Toronto Star newspaper, or was its chief, whatever, was on this crusade about amateurism, where professional hockey was greatly poo-pooed, and you can't have the top level of hockey can't be played by paid athletes. Only amateurs could play the game. So there was this big war, the athletic war it was called, between amateurism and professionalism, and it just seems so bizarre looking back a century ago that this was even a thing, right? so it was kind of this evolution of professional hockey, because amateurism in Ontario especially was really rampant, but professional leagues had started to spring up across Canada and the States, and in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that's where the first artificial ice arena sprung up. And so the professional game and leagues and teams came and went, and players went all around. There was no contracts. They could play for a bunch of different teams in any given season. And so it was this whole evolution of the game, and eventually professional hockey did come to Toronto. An amateur team named the Toronto, I think they were just called the Torontos back then, got a sniff of the Stanley Cup and just came like a hair within winning it in 1908, I think it was. And that kind of cemented Toronto's quest for, like, they need hockey there. And eventually, as everything evolved, professional hockey finally did come to Toronto when they got an artificial ice arena, and a team called the Toronto Blue Shirts won Toronto's first Stanley Cup in the year 1914. And what's funny is I didn't quite understand why, but when you look at the Stanley Cup banners in Scotiabank Arena, that cup won by the Blue Shirts in 1914 is the only one not represented there for some reason. Like, they've cut ties with that team, which seems kind of bizarre. The Toronto Maple Leafs, like the Toronto Professionals morphed into the Toronto Blue Shirts, who won that cup, and then they became the Arenas, and then they became the St. Pats, and then that gave way to the Maple Leafs we have nowadays. And all the cups won by the Arenas, the St. Pats, the Leafs, they're all represented by the banners, but that one by the Blue Shirts is not, for some reason, not counted in their total, which would be nice, because instead of 13, they'd have 14 cups, right? It's the Leafs franchise is started, their founding year, they say, is 1917. So that 1914 cup doesn't count for some reason. So I didn't quite understand why that happened, but it seems kind of silly to me since the Blue Shirts gave way to all the other teams after them. But it is what it is, and the whole thing was bizarre, the amateurism thing, and like, I get it, but in my opinion, you can't have somebody dedicate their life, especially nowadays when there's 82 games and playoffs. You can't have somebody dedicate their lives to playing a sport and not pay them for it, you know. Now, do they deserve $10-11 million a year? No. Oh God, no. All athletes all over the world, in the most cases of the big major sports, are grossly overpaid. There's nothing we can do about it, you know. It's not going to prevent us from watching the sport, but they're grossly overpaid. But can they simply play the sport for love and have a job on the side when the sports are these involved these days? No, you have to pay them. And I'm not sure, maybe it was a different time back then, a century ago, but the whole debate just seems bizarre to me. So, but I can't really say for sure, because it was over 100 years ago and things were very different back then. But my opinion is, you know, baseball, hockey, football, basketball, motorsports, soccer, all these other, like, all these major sports where guys dedicate their whole year to playing games, training and stuff, they have to be paid for it. You can't have another job on the side when you're that involved with a sport. But do they deserve the amount of money they get? God, no. God, no. I'm a struggling travel agent, and I work just as hard as they do, and I can barely get by. So, you know what? You know, no. This whole multi-million thing is friggin' ridiculous in my opinion, but we're getting off topic, so we'll just stop that there. That was the end of that. The most things in this post are video games. A bit of an older one, NHL 2K9 for the Wii. Just finished playing it. When you hold up other video games against EA Sports' hockey games, like, that's the bar, and some of them come close. Some of them are even better in some aspects, but worse in others, so they're kind of like tied. But most fall short, and the 2K9, especially on the Wii, fall very short. The graphics are not nearly as good. The controls, because they're the motion controls, they're just sometimes they work perfectly, but then all of a sudden you're trying to pass, and your player will only do back passes, drop passes, so you have to rush, and you're turning over the puck all the time. So, like, the control scheme is just not great. The one thing I did like about this game is that once you get set up in the offensive end, if the controls are working properly, you can really throw the puck around and do a lot of real life kind of things that you'd see in an actual NHL hockey game. So I thought the gameplay was really good, but it needed a lot of polishing. It needed the controls to be much better. So I'd give this game like maybe a 6 or something like that. It did have a couple really cool alternate modes. Pond hockey, which has become popular in a lot of more recent games like the 3-on-3 and that sort of thing. But then they also had a mini rink mode where the rink is just shrunk really, really like half the size maybe, and there's only 3 players aside with goalies. So it's like you're never skating any great distance before you get the puck. Like it's just so fast and so intense. So that was really a cool part of the game. But overall, it just needed a lot more work put into it to make it even a good game, right? So, but it is what it is. Next up, PS4 Need for Speed Rivals. The whole story behind this one is that this street racing syndicate is kind of taking over this seaside city and causing all sorts of mayhem. You can play the game from either side. You can be the cops and chase down the racers and stop their reign of racing terror, or you can play as the racers and take the piss out of the cops. And so I played both. I wanted to go through both, and I finished all missions. The story's neat, but it's not. It gets repetitive after a while. You know, it's just kind of the same thing over and over again. And as you go along, there's just cutscenes that kind of gloss over the story, right? So it's it looks great, it plays great, it's super fun, but it just gets a little repetitive after a while. If you were to just play through the missions that the story mode takes you through on each side, it would be good. Like that would be fine. But I'm kind of a completist, so I went back and went through all of the other missions that I didn't complete along the way because I wanted all the trophies and whatnot. That's just the way I roll. And so as I did that, it just got to be more repetitive. But it is a good game. I'd probably give it like an 8 or something like that. And I really like the Need for Speed series. They make some really good racing games. And this one, although not the best of the bunch, it is really good. So next up, another Lego game down. Lego The Incredibles. So this Lego game just gives us both Incredibles movies in Lego form. You go through a bunch of different missions that make up both movies. Destroy things, build things, solve puzzles, unlock characters, unlock vehicles, earn gold bricks, and unlock all sorts of things. So it's the typical Lego format. And what I liked about this is that a lot of the extra characters you could unlock were all various Disney things. Like Dory was in it, Woody was in it, Wally was in it. Not all the characters from all those movies. Lightning McQueen was in it, but one kind of from each kind of movie. So that was kind of neat to see. I wasn't expecting that. But it was typical of what Lego games are like these days. It had a big game hub with different districts that you could go to and explore. The levels were medium length most of the time, and there were a fair number of levels in the game. It's not, if you want to complete the whole game, it's not something that's just going to take you a few hours or whatever. You really do, you know, there's lots of sessions involved. So it's typical if you play Lego games these days, it's right kind of in the average normal kind of Lego thing, which is fun. Like Lego games these days are super fun. So there's no shame in buying Lego Incredibles, and I'm sure it's only $19.99 these days to get anyways. So another beauty there. Next up, for the PS4, new Gundam Breaker. I'm not very familiar with Gundam. I've built a few models in the last few years, and I like mech suit stuff. That's what I like. I love Voltron, and well, not that they're mech suit, they're lions, but same robotic thing. I love Robotech. So Gundam seemed like a natural thing for me to like, but it's pretty in depth. Like there's a lot of Gundam stuff out there, and I don't even know where to begin with any of it. And I'm into so many things that I don't think I'll even bother. But I do like to dabble a bit with the Gundam. And so this game, the story is that you're this new student at Gunbray High School, and all they do at this school is build and battle with Gundams. It's like, what is this school real? Because I want to go there. But the story is that you go to this new school. You're a new student there. There's this girl there that you knew as a kid, and you kind of reunion with her, and things are going well until you learn that the student council at this school has kind of taken things over, and they're a bunch of dicks, and the rest of the students can't really express themselves and build and battle their Gundam like they thought they would be able to. So you kind of fall in with this friend of yours from your past and her other friends, and develop this team that challenges the student council as the plot rolls along, and eventually you take them down and set the school to rights where everybody can be happy building Gundam, and there's a bunch of different characters paths that you can follow. It's all pretty repetitive. It's the same sort of thing. The battles are all very similar, but it is super fun. So it's kind of like Need for Speed Rivals. Once you play through the first character's story mode, it's great, it's fun. But then as you go along and do all the other ones, it gets a bit repetitive. So I'd give it the same thing. I'd give it like Need for Speed. I'd give it like an 8. Definitely worth it. And I think this game was very expensive at the start, so I had to wait for a while. But I think it's like super cheap now. So definitely would be worth a buy at this point. I did have one more thing. I don't have the case for it because it was one of the more recent free PS4 Plus downloads. The Wipeout Omega collection for the PS4. I'd always been interested when I saw this game in stores. It looked very neat. It's like futurist. It's kind of like an updated F-Zero. It's racing in these kind of hover vehicles, but it's kind of lacking in story, I guess. You go into your vehicle, you do a race, you can unlock new vehicles, and there's a few different race types you can do. You can just do straight out racing, there's time trials, and then there's also battle races where you acquire weapons throughout the race and blast the other vehicles and gain points to win and sort of thing. But the game, and you do seasons, and you graduate to the next year's season and stuff like that. But the game got really hard really fast. Like, I made it through the first season completing all events, not totally like the top rank, but I got through the first season fairly okay. And then the second season, it just got way too hard, way too fast, and I couldn't win some events to unlock future events. And although the game look like the graphics are great, it looks fantastic, but it's just so repetitive. It's just like, why am I beating my head trying to win this race that looked like the last race and which will look like the next race if I'm able to beat this race in order just to try and beat this game? Like, it just got old very fast. So there just wasn't enough difference. Some games just have that thing that draw you back, and sometimes you don't know what it is, but you get excited to play it, and you're always coming back to it until you play the crap out of it and you're done, right? You just can't stop. This game was like, started off okay, and then as it got harder and harder, I was just like, I'm gonna play something else. You know, it just got kind of old really quickly, and it's too bad because, like I said, it looks fantastic, and the controls are a bit wonky too, especially when you're trying to do tight turns. It always seemed to overcompensate, and you're going into walls, and sometimes that's okay. It's just a matter of you getting used to the controls. But in this game, it never seemed to sort itself out. I think they were just too sensitive, and it's like there was no flow to it. There's no getting used to the controls. It's just they were a bit off. And when you're running into walls all the time, and a second can mean 1 second faster can mean the difference between totally failing an event and winning it. You can't be crashing into the wall all the time, right? So it just got old really quickly, and I was like, you know what? I got other games to play. I got so many other PS Plus free downloads that I haven't even touched yet. I'm just going to put this game away, probably give it a 6 like I did NHL 2K9 and be done with it. So that's kind of my thoughts on that game. Other people might think it was much better, but to me, I tired of it very quickly, and it's, for me, it's done. Maybe one day, I always say that one day, there's always new games coming, and I'll never go back to that game. But I always say one day maybe. But yeah, so that's all for now. A bunch of games, a couple books, and a movie, and yeah, there will be more coming in the near future, I'm sure. As we get closer to Christmas, I'll probably have one more post before Christmas, and then as Christmas arrives, God knows, our house gets absolutely berserk, so I may not have something until after Christmas for a while, because God knows what I'll be doing and how busy I'll be, but I'll definitely probably have at least one more post before Christmas, and we will see what that one entails once it arrives. Toodaloo!